For women over the age of 60, the threat of dementia is not just a medical statistic. It is a deeply personal concern that often begins with whispers rather than shouts. A mother forgets the secret ingredient in a cake she has baked for 40 years. A grandmother starts wearing a heavy wool coat in the middle of July. A wife who used to be the social center of every gathering suddenly becomes quiet and withdrawn during family dinners. You probably think these are just senior moments, the natural slowing down that comes with 6 decades of life. But what if these weren't just signs of getting older? What if they were the subtle initial tremors of a brain that is beginning to lose its map of the world? Dementia, and specifically Alzheimer's disease, affects women disproportionately. 2/3 of all dementia patients worldwide are women. For decades, scientists thought this was simply because women live longer. But we now know the truth is far more complex. It involves hormones, brain structure, and even the way women's immune systems react to aging. Yet, despite this high risk, women's symptoms are frequently dismissed as menopause brain, depression, or just old age. This leads to tragic delays in diagnosis, often until the damage is so severe that the window for early intervention has closed. In this video, we are going to uncover 12 early warning signs of dementia, specifically affecting women over 60. We've analyzed the latest clinical data to identify symptoms that are almost always ignored during daily life. We have a special focus on sign number 5. This specific warning is the one most people miss because it doesn't look like memory loss at all. It looks like a simple change in personality or lack of interest. Yet, it is often the very first sign that the frontal lobes are under attack. Before we dive into these 12 signs, I need to be absolutely transparent. This content is for educational awareness and to help you advocate for health. If you recognize these patterns in yourself or a loved one, seek comprehensive neurological evaluation. Early detection is the only way to access treatments that can slow cognitive decline progression. Now, let's look at the signs that most families realize only when it's too late. Sign number 12, the broken filter. Loss of social etiquette. One of the most jarring early signs of dementia in women isn't forgetting a name. It's a sudden change in social boundaries. Women over 60 who have spent decades navigating social nuances may suddenly start saying things that are shockingly blunt or inappropriate. A woman who was always gracious and kind suddenly makes a rude comment about a stranger's appearance in a grocery store. She tells off-colored jokes she would have never entertained before. This isn't grumpiness or personality change from stress. This is often a sign that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that acts as our social filter, is beginning to shrink. The prefrontal cortex sits behind the forehead and controls impulse regulation, social judgment, and behavioral appropriateness. According to a study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, changes in social conduct and empathy are frequently the earliest indicators of frontotemporal dementia, occurring years before the first memory slip. When this brain region deteriorates, the internal voice that says, "Don't say that out loud," becomes weaker or disappears entirely. Brain imaging studies show that women with early dementia often display reduced gray matter volume in the prefrontal regions. This shrinkage disrupts the neural circuits responsible for filtering thoughts before they become words. The loss of social etiquette manifests in several ways. Making personal comments about others' weight, appearance, or clothing in public settings. Interrupting conversations repeatedly without awareness. Laughing at inappropriate moments during serious discussions. Making sexual or bathroom-related comments in formal settings. Family members often feel shocked or embarrassed by these new behaviors. The woman who raised them to be polite is now the one causing uncomfortable social situations. If the polite filter disappears, the brain is losing its ability to regulate social behavior. This represents actual structural changes in brain tissue, not just aging or mood shifts. Sign number 10, the kitchen chaos, executive function loss. For many women, the kitchen is a place of muscle memory. Recipes are known by heart. Timing is automatic. But when early dementia sets in, complex multi-step tasks that were once second nature suddenly become overwhelming. Picture a woman preparing a traditional family dinner. She has cooked this meal hundreds of times. But now she stands in the middle of the kitchen looking confused. Potatoes are boiling over on the stove, but she hasn't started the meat. She can't seem to figure out which task to do first. This is a failure of executive function. The brain's ability to plan, organize, and execute a sequence of actions. The prefrontal cortex and parietal lobes work together to create mental checklists and prioritize steps. When these regions begin to deteriorate, the ability to juggle multiple tasks simultaneously breaks down. In women, this often shows up first in domestic routines. Cooking requires holding multiple pieces of information in working memory. You must remember what's cooking, for how long, at what temperature, and what comes next. You must monitor several things simultaneously while planning ahead. They aren't forgetting how to cook. They are losing the ability to organize the steps of cooking. A report in the Lancet Neurology suggests that these planning difficulties are a hallmark of vascular changes in the brain that often precede Alzheimer's disease. Executive function loss also appears in other daily activities. Difficulty managing medication schedules, taking pills at wrong times or forgetting whether they were taken. Inability to balance a checkbook or follow multi-step instructions. Trouble planning and preparing for appointments or social events. Confusion when trying to follow a recipe, even a familiar one. The kitchen chaos is particularly telling because cooking is such an overlearned skill for many women. When something practiced for decades suddenly becomes confusing, it signals that the brain's organizational centers are failing. Brain scans of women experiencing executive function decline show reduced activity in the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning and organization. Blood flow to these areas decreases, starving neurons of oxygen and nutrients. Sign number 9, the sarcasm gap, loss of abstract thinking. Does she suddenly seem to miss the joke? One of the more subtle signs of cognitive decline is a shift toward literal thinking. Imagine making a sarcastic comment about the weather and she looks at you with total confusion, taking your words literally. She no longer understands metaphors in books or movies. She interprets figures of speech as literal statements. This happens because processing sarcasm and irony require high-level cross-talk between different brain regions. The brain must recognize the literal meaning of words, detect tone of voice, read facial expressions, and integrate context to understand that the speaker means the opposite of what they said. When neuropathways begin to fray, the brain loses the ability to grasp abstract concepts and falls back on literal concrete interpretations. The temporal lobes, particularly the right hemisphere, play crucial roles in understanding nonliteral language. Research from the University of California, San Francisco, found that the inability to detect sarcasm or understand social white lies is a strong early indicator of neurodegeneration in the temporal lobes. Patients with temporal lobe damage showed significant impairment in sarcasm detection compared to healthy controls. The sarcasm gap manifests in several ways. Taking jokes literally and not understanding why others are laughing. Interpreting idioms literally, such as, "It's raining cats and dogs" means actual animals are falling from the sky. Difficulty understanding movies or TV shows with complex humor or satire. Confusion when people use exaggeration for emphasis. This shift toward concrete thinking represents the brain losing its ability to process multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. Abstract thought requires integrating information from memory, language, social knowledge, and emotional processing. Women experiencing this decline may stop enjoying comedy shows they once loved. They may become frustrated during conversations where family members tease or joke with each other. The world becomes more literal and less nuanced. Sign number 8, the sense of smell disappearance, anosmia. This is a sign that almost no one associates with the brain, but for women over 60, it is one of the most accurate predictors of future Alzheimer's disease. A woman complains that flowers don't smell like anything anymore. She stops noticing the smell of something burning on the stove. She can't identify common scents like coffee, cinnamon, or roses. This isn't just a sinus problem or seasonal allergies. The olfactory bulb responsible for smell is directly connected to the hippocampus responsible for memory and the amygdala responsible for emotions. These brain structures are among the first affected by Alzheimer's disease. In many cases of Alzheimer's disease, toxic proteins called amyloid and tau actually build up in the smell sensors of the brain first before they ever reach the memory sensors. The olfactory neurons which detect odors are some of the only neurons in the human body that regenerate throughout life. But in Alzheimer's, this regeneration process becomes impaired. A study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society followed thousands of women and found that those who could not identify common smells like rose, peppermint, or leather were significantly more likely to develop dementia within 5 years. The correlation was so strong that smell tests are now being considered as potential screening tools for early Alzheimer's. Smell loss in dementia differs from normal age-related decline. Normal aging might reduce smell sensitivity by 10 to 20%. But in early Alzheimer's, the decline is dramatic and rapid. A woman might go from normal smell function to barely detecting strong odors within months. The loss often follows a pattern. Sweet smells like vanilla and strawberry are lost first. Then comes loss of mint and citrus scents. Finally, even pungent smells like vinegar or smoke become undetectable. This smell loss has dangerous practical consequences. Unable to smell smoke, gas leaks, or spoiled food, women become vulnerable to household accidents. They may eat expired food without noticing the smell of spoilage. Testing smell function is simple but rarely done in routine medical exams. The University of Pennsylvania Smell Identification Test uses scratch and sniff cards to assess ability to identify 40 common odors. Women over 60 who score poorly on this test should receive comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Sign number 8, the gaze and blink rate change. Next time you talk with a loved one, look closely at her eyes. Is she blinking less than she used to? Does she seem to stare through you rather than at you? Neurologists have long noted that a fixed gaze or reduced blink rate can be an early sign of various dementias including Lewy body dementia and Alzheimer's disease. This happens because the brain's visual processing and motor control systems are slowing down. The normal blink rate is 15 to 20 blinks per minute. Blinking serves multiple functions. It moistens the eyes, clears debris, and gives the brain micro breaks to process visual information. In early dementia, the blink rate often drops to 5 to 10 blinks per minute, or even lower. This reduced blinking creates a stare that appears vacant or intense. Family members describe it as looking through them instead of at them. The eyes seem less animated, less responsive to social cues. The mechanism involves the basal ganglia brain structures that control automatic movements including blinking. In Lewy body dementia, abnormal protein deposits called Lewy bodies accumulate in these regions disrupting normal motor function. The fixed gaze also relates to visual processing speed. The brain takes longer to process incoming visual information, so the person stares longer trying to make sense of what they see. The usual rapid eye movements that scan faces and scenes become slower and less frequent. Research published in the journal Ophthalmology found that patients with Alzheimer's disease showed significantly reduced blink rates and prolonged fixation times compared to age-matched controls. These eye movement changes appeared years before memory symptoms became obvious. The gaze changes manifest in several ways. Staring at objects or people for uncomfortably long periods. Reduced eye contact during conversations. Slower eye movements when tracking moving objects, difficulty shifting gaze from one object to another smoothly. If a woman over 60 seems to have a frozen or intensely vacant stare during conversation, it's a sign that the brain is struggling to process incoming visual and social information. The eyes aren't just windows to the soul, they are windows to the brain's processing speed. Sign number 7, the impossible misplacement. We all lose our keys. That is normal aging. But there is a specific type of losing things that signals dementia. Finding eyeglasses inside the freezer, car keys inside the sugar bowl, the TV remote in the bathroom cabinet, the phone in the refrigerator vegetable drawer. It's not just that she forgot where she put them. She put them in a place that makes no logical sense. This is a failure of spatial memory and reasoning. The brain can no longer categorize where objects belong in a three-dimensional world. The hippocampus and parietal lobes work together to create mental maps of space and object locations. For women, this often manifests with everyday household items. The brain still remembers opening the refrigerator, but can't remember why or what object was being held, so the item gets left in whatever location the person happens to be. Normal absent-mindedness might involve putting keys in an unusual pocket or leaving glasses on a different table. But finding objects in completely illogical locations, like finding mail in the oven or finding jewelry in the trash, can indicate that spatial reasoning has broken down. Research based out of Duke University found that women with these types of misplacements have reduced gray matter volume in the posterior parietal cortex, a region crucial for spatial navigation and object location memory. The misplacement also involves another deficit, the inability to retrace steps mentally. When you lose something normally, you can think back through your actions and reconstruct where you might have left it. But in early dementia, this mental replay function fails. If you find the TV remote in the bathroom cabinet more than once, it is time to schedule a cognitive screen. These bizarre placements represent actual changes in how the brain processes spatial information and object relationships. Sign number 6, the repetitive loop. We all tell the same stories occasionally, but the dementia loop is different and unmistakable. Picture a woman asking what time the doctor's appointment is. You answer 2 o'clock. 5 minutes later, she asks again. 5 minutes after that, she asks a third time with no memory of having asked before. This isn't distraction or absent-mindedness. This is a failure of short-term encoding. The brain is literally unable to move new information from the inbox to the hard drive. The hippocampus normally transfers information from short-term memory, which lasts seconds to minutes, into long-term memory, which can last years. This transfer happens through a process called consolidation, where memories are strengthened through repeated neural firing. In early Alzheimer's, the hippocampus begins to deteriorate. Amyloid plaques and tau angles accumulate in this region first. As neurons die, the consolidation process breaks down. New information enters the brain but never gets stored. According to the Alzheimer's Association, this repetitive questioning is often the breaking point where families finally realize something is wrong. The person might ask the same question 10, 15, even 20 times in a single hour. In women, this is often masked by social mimicking. They might nod and smile as if they remember, but the information has completely vanished. They've learned to cover their memory loss with social pleasantries and generic responses. The repetitive loop appears in several forms. Asking the same question repeatedly despite receiving answers. Telling the same story multiple times in a single conversation unaware of the repetition. Repeatedly checking whether doors are locked or appliances are off. Calling family members multiple times about the same topic. Research from Johns Hopkins University found that repetitive questioning correlates with severe hippocampal atrophy. The more frequent and rapid the repetitions, the more advanced the underlying damage. This symptom causes enormous frustration for caregivers. Answering the same question for the 10th time requires patience and understanding that the person genuinely has no memory of asking before. Sign number 5, the big one, the financial fog. This is the sign that almost everyone misses, and it's arguably the most dangerous. Most people assume dementia starts with names or faces, but it often starts with numbers and money. For women over 60 who have spent a lifetime managing household budgets, paying bills, or handling taxes, this is a massive red flag. A woman who was always meticulous with her checkbook suddenly gets a past due notice for her electricity bill. She starts struggling to calculate a 15% tip at a restaurant, something she used to do mentally in seconds. She falls victim to a phone scam she would have easily spotted a year ago. This happens because the parietal lobe, which handles numerical calculations, spatial relationships, and logical sequences, is often one of the first areas to show a decline in glucose metabolism during early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The parietal lobe processes numerical information, spatial relationships, and logical sequences. When this region begins to fail, numbers stop making sense. A checkbook becomes a confusing jumble of figures. Bills pile up because the brain can't organize the steps required to pay them. A study published in the journal Health Affairs found that people often start making significant financial mistakes like missing payments or making unusual purchases up to 6 years before a formal dementia diagnosis. These mistakes serve as early warning signs that cognitive decline has begun. Because money is a private topic, many women hide these mistakes out of shame. They don't want to admit they can't balance a checkbook anymore. They don't want family members to think they're losing control. This secrecy makes financial fog the most silent sign on this list. The financial fog manifests in multiple ways. Difficulty calculating tips, making change or understanding prices, confusion about bill due dates and payment amounts, paying the same bill multiple times or not paying at all. Falling for scams, giving money or personal information to strangers, making impulsive or illogical purchases out of character, inability to understand bank statements or financial documents. Research from Duke University found that older adults with mild cognitive impairment showed significantly worse performance on financial capacity tests compared to cognitively healthy peers. They struggled with tasks like comparing costs, calculating change, and understanding loan terms. The financial consequences can be devastating. Life savings disappear to scammers. Credit scores plummet from unpaid bills. Essential services like utilities get shut off. Family members often don't discover the problem until thousands of dollars have been lost. If you notice a sudden change in how a woman handles her finances, it is a neurological emergency. This isn't just forgetfulness. It represents actual brain damage affecting the regions responsible for numerical processing and logical decision-making. Early intervention is critical. Take over bill paying. Set up automatic payments for essential expenses. Monitor bank accounts for unusual activity. Report scams to authorities. Most importantly, get comprehensive cognitive testing to identify the underlying cause. Sign number 4, the wandering word aphasia. Everyone has tip-of-the-tongue moments, but in early dementia, women begin to lose the names for common objects and replace them with placeholder words. Instead of saying, "Pass me the remote," she might say, "Pass me that, the clicker thing for the box." She might call a watch a hand clock or a pen a writing stick. She refers to everything as thing or that thing over there. This is called anomia, a form of aphasia where specific words cannot be retrieved from memory. The language centers in the left hemisphere of the brain, particularly Broca's area and Wernicke's area, begin to deteriorate. As these regions lose function, the brain loses specific files for nouns. The concept of the object remains intact. She knows what a pen does, but the label, the word itself, has disappeared from her vocabulary. Anomia and dementia follows a predictable pattern. Proper nouns, names of people and places disappear first. Then come low-frequency words, less commonly used terms. Finally, even high-frequency everyday objects become difficult to name. Research published in the Journal of Neurology found that naming difficulties, particularly for objects, animals, and actions appear early in Alzheimer's progression and worsen over time. The more specific and less common the word, the earlier it tends to be lost. The wandering word manifests in several ways. Using generic words like thing or stuff constantly. Creating descriptive phrases instead of using proper names. Stopping mid-sentence, unable to find the right word, substituting similar-sounding words or related concepts, becoming frustrated and giving up on sentences. If you notice she uses fingamagic or that thing constantly, or if she stops mid-sentence and can't find her way back, the language pathways are being compromised. This represents actual damage to the neural networks that store and retrieve words. Sign number 3, the hobby withdrawal, loss of complex interests. Has she suddenly stopped knitting? Did she quit her book club or stop playing bridge? Many families assume this is just depression or getting tired of the hobby. But for a woman over 60, complex hobbies like quilting, bridge, or reading require massive amounts of cognitive bandwidth. You have to remember patterns, follow rules, track characters, and plan ahead. When dementia begins, these hobbies become mentally painful because the brain has to work 10 times harder to achieve the same result. Instead of admitting they are confused, many women simply say they don't enjoy it anymore and withdraw. This social and cognitive withdrawal is a defense mechanism to hide growing confusion. The hobby hasn't become boring. It has become cognitively overwhelming. Consider the mental demands of common hobbies. Knitting requires following patterns, counting stitches, remembering sequences, and visualizing the final product. Bridge requires remembering cards played, following complex rules, strategizing, and working with a partner. Reading requires following plot lines, remembering characters, understanding subtext, and maintaining focus for extended periods. When the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus begin to failing, these tasks become exhausting rather than enjoyable. The brain experiences constant failure and frustration. Rather than continue struggling, the person abandons the activity. Research from Rush University Medical Center found that older adults who remained engaged in cognitively stimulating hobbies showed slower rates of cognitive decline. Conversely, those who abandoned complex activities showed accelerated deterioration. The hobby withdrawal often precedes other obvious symptoms by years. Family members remember now that you mention it. She did stop painting about 2 years before the memory problem started. This sign is particularly insidious because it masquerades as loss of interest rather than loss of ability. The person maintains dignity by claiming they're bored with the hobby rather than admitting it has become too difficult. Sign number 2, the storyline slip. Inability to follow narratives. Does she struggle to follow the plot of a 30-minute sitcom or a movie? Imagine watching a movie together and halfway through she asks, "Wait, who is that guy? Is he the brother?" Even though the character was introduced 20 minutes ago, this is a failure of working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information in real time. The brain can no longer thread the pieces of a story together into a coherent narrative. Working memory is like a mental whiteboard where the brain temporarily holds information while using it. It allows us to follow conversations, track story lines, and connect current events to earlier context. When the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus begin to deteriorate, this mental whiteboard becomes smaller and information erases quickly. A character introduced 20 minutes ago has vanished completely from memory. The person watching the movie experiences each scene in isolation, unable to connect it to what came before. Research from Cambridge University suggests that inability to follow complex narratives is a strong predictor of Alzheimer's progression in women. It indicates the hippocampus is no longer successfully bridging the gap between past and present information. The storyline slip appears in multiple contexts. Forgetting earlier parts of a TV show or movie while watching. Losing track of conversations, asking to have earlier points repeated. Difficulty following complex news stories or explanations. Confusion about the sequence of events in family stories or recent happenings. This symptom often frustrates both the person experiencing it and those around them. Family members may feel like they're constantly repeating themselves. The affected woman feels confused and overwhelmed by information that should be simple to follow. Books become particularly difficult. Reading requires remembering characters, plot points, and context from previous chapters. Women who were voracious readers may abandon books altogether, claiming they can't find anything interesting anymore. Sign number 1, the walking speed shift. Gait changes. This is the most surprising sign of all. Your brain and your legs are more connected than you think. Recent research has shown that slow gait, a significant decrease in walking speed, is often a precursor to dementia. For women over 60, pay attention to stride length and speed. Does she take shorter, more tentative steps? Does she shuffle slightly instead of lifting her feet fully? Even more telling is dual tasking difficulty. Can she walk and have a complex conversation at the same time? If she has to stop walking to finish a sentence, it's because her brain can no longer handle the motor task of walking and the cognitive task of talking simultaneously. The brain's processing capacity is finite. Walking, despite seeming automatic, requires significant cognitive resources. The brain must process balance, coordinate leg movements, navigate obstacles, and plan the walking path. When cognitive reserves decline, there's not enough processing power to handle both walking and talking. The brain must choose, and it prioritizes the conversation, forcing the body to stop moving. Research published in JAMA Network Open followed thousands of older adults and found that those with slow walking speeds had significantly higher rates of dementia diagnosis within 5 years. The slower the gait, the higher the risk. The connection between gait and cognition involves several brain regions. The motor cortex controls leg movements. The cerebellum coordinates balance and smooth motion. The prefrontal cortex plans the walking route and manages obstacles. The basal ganglia regulate walking rhythm and speed. When Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia damage these regions, walking ability deteriorates alongside cognitive function.